This is Launching Your Daughter podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here is today's episode. Episode 20. Welcome. I'm so excited for this episode today. My guest is Amy Pender from SRI Investing. And Amy's passion for breaking down barriers for women and girls shines through in this conversation I have with her. She encourages parents to make money a non-taboo topic. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with her because when I was growing up, my dad made sure both my brother and I knew about investing. We talked about money management, same thing with my mom. And it was never a taboo topic in our home. I think some of it is due to grandparents that went through the Depression and wanting to make sure we understood how to manage it, what it meant. So we weren't afraid to, own it as we grew up. So I hope that you find this conversation I have with Amy very eye-opening and something that you will begin to have more discussion around in your family. Thanks and enjoy. Well, welcome everybody. Today my guest is Amy Pender, and she is the owner of SRI Investing, and I am so excited to have her on today because we're going to talk all about money, girls and women, and what that means. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm happy to be here with you.
Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about you and your company?
Happy to do that. So I'm a financial advisor and I have a business partner, and together we own the firm SRI Investing. And that is a firm that focuses pretty exclusively on helping people who want their investments to not only do well for them and make a profit for them, but to also be invested in companies that are doing good for the planet and for our society across the world. So basically, we say that we help people invest in companies whose processes and products are not harming people or the planet.
Oh, that's
so
great.
It's a really Thanks. Yeah, it's a fun way to go about it. And certainly, what attracted me to even the world of finance, generally the world of finance was not so interesting to me. But when I found out that you could actually be in finance and do this really cool thing, that was when I got very, very excited.
Yeah, I think some of the investing classes I had in high school, although we had an accounting class, it wasn't really talked too much about, well, even high school and college, the being socially responsible or investing in companies that don't harm the planet or people, that wasn't really talked about. It was more just kind of this general overview. So it is nice to go, hey, we can raise a little bit of self-awareness and deepen that so that the people listening can say, hey, I really do have a choice in what I invest, where I invest my money.
Absolutely. And there's an old myth out there that if you invest this way that you give up return. But we have, a good 20 to 25 years of research and data now that tells a very, very different story. So basically, portfolios that are invested in a socially responsible way tend to outperform portfolios that are not invested that way by a little tiny bit, but they also tend to be just a little bit more volatile, meaning the value goes up and down a little tiny bit more. Mm-hmm. So when you equalize them for the amount of variation in the portfolio or the risk, so you create a risk-adjusted return, they are practically identical. So,
cool.
Slightly different performance, but not necessarily better or worse.
Yeah.
So people don't have to give up in order to invest this way, which is the really good news.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, today I know you have got some really beautiful information about women and girls and just, I want to say kind of in money and managing it or being able to talk about it. So I would love if you can share a little more with our listeners about that.
Absolutely. So, one of the things I'm really worried about is the economic security for women and girls, and not just in the United States, but around the world. Mm-hmm. So I know that, some of these statistics kind of get passed around a lot and we hear them probably a lot, but I just want to take a minute to focus in on them and look at them a little bit more thoughtfully with your listeners, if you don't mind.
That would
So
be
the first
great.
thing I want to talk about is a phenomenon known as the pink tax, and that's been pretty much, in the social media news lately. But basically, just to remind listeners of what that is, 42% of the time, products that are marketed to women and girls, like razors and shampoo and clothing and toys and things like that, cost more than those that are marketed to men and boys. So
Huh.
I know. So, you think about that when you go to the grocery store and you go to buy razors and you go, well, here are the pink plastic razors and here are the blue plastic razors. And they look exactly the same, but the pink ones seem to cost more. And, I think that we as women and girls really need to start like having some awareness around that and maybe making some choices around that. Like, do I really need the pink razors? Is it worth paying more for the pink razors than the blue razors? I mean, people can decide that for themselves, but
Right.
certainly making a decision like that with some good information behind it is a good way to go.
Yeah.
So that's one that I wanted to just sort of bring up. The next one is called the tampon tax, which, yeah, the tampon tax. And that too has been, pretty popular in social media recently. But basically, the information behind it is that tampons and other feminine hygiene products certainly don't really have a male equivalent. Like there's nothing really that a man has to buy on a monthly basis. That's really necessity for biological functioning. And that those items are taxed as luxury items by the majority of states in the United States. So
Wow.
I know, right? So, we as women and girls certainly do not think, usually that time of the month as something that would be treated as a luxury. So,
Right.
there is some motion afoot, especially I think in California, to change that, and stop taxing women and girls on something that really is not a choice for them. So there, right out the gate, just going to the store, just buying toys, just buying clothes, just buying feminine hygiene products, just buying razors. I mean, women and girls are kind of behind the eight ball, right
Right.
there.
Yeah.
So then, that starts pretty early on in life, so the girl scooter costs more than the boy scooter and things like that. Then let's get to the point where women and girls become earners. And let's talk a little bit about the gender pay gap, which I know most people have heard, and almost everyone has heard that generally women earn today 79 cents for every dollar that a man earns, and that's for equal work. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. What does that really mean? So first of all, what's interesting is that that gap exists regardless of education, regardless of
Ah.
occupation. Yeah, because I think that people tend to think, oh, well, I think that's only like, when women get into like the top echelon of companies, that they tend to
Yeah.
earn less for the same pay. But no, that's really not what the research shows, that it's basically across the spectrum of occupations and education and pay. So that's, I think, a little bit of an eye opener for people.
Yes.
Yeah. The second thing I want to say about this statistic is that if we think about that, okay, 79 cents for every dollar, what that means is that it takes a woman 3 extra months of work to earn what men earn in 1 year. So when you play that out over a really long career, just think about how much less money over the long term women are earning for equal work versus men.
Amy, I just want to stop you right there. I mean, I want to say thank you for really extending that out because, yeah, it may not sound like it's a big difference, really, when you go,
Right.
79 cents per dollar. But when you extrapolate that and make that go out for months and saying it takes an extra 3 months, that's a big difference.
It's a huge difference,
Yeah.
So think about 10 years of working. Well, you have to work 13 years, women have to work 13 years. Think about, 20 years. I mean, just keep going with it. And then you
Yeah.
start to see, wow, that little tiny bit, is really a lot when you compound it over time.
Yeah.
So I think it's just so important that we get that word out there and that we make our girls aware of this. And we'll talk in a few minutes, I'm sure about what we could do as parents and citizens to help, right this wrong, because I think that, nearly everyone would agree that, gosh, that's just really not fair. And that's not good for the women in our society. And that's just not good for society as a whole. And just again, to reiterate that, like, education doesn't close that gap, because we often go back to the old mantra, well, we just have to make sure that, our girls get a good education just like our boys. But sadly, that's not the thing that is causing the pay gap.
Yeah.
So education is great and we want that to happen, but that's not what's going to close the gap. That's another thing that I wanted to bring to our attention. And one more.
Okay.
If you are a mother, the news is even worse for you. So mothers are typically paid only 73 cents for every dollar that fathers earn. Right. 73 instead of 79. Okay, so, it's 6 cents, less, but what does that 6 cents mean? That means that it takes mothers an extra 5 months of work to earn what working fathers are paid in a year. 5 months. So almost, half again as long to earn this amount of money. So that's just, that seems unacceptable. Right?
Yes.
Because it is difficult to be a working mom, and so many of our moms in today's society are working moms. And so to be at such an economic disadvantage is really, really untenable. I mean, 40% of households in the United States with children have a mother who is either the sole or the primary earner for the family. 40% of households with children. Right. So it's not just a small percentage of our households in the United States that we're talking about here. It's almost half. It's really an important thing to think about. One other thing around motherhood, and this I think will surprise people. After becoming fathers, men, the research shows, generally see a 6% increase in their earnings, while women see a 4% decrease per child.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That is shocking. Oh, wow.
So, I think that we really need to be cognizant of these statistics and get them out there and get them into everyday parlance so that we can be outraged by them and we can really, band together and do something about them. Just, to put all of this in perspective, certainly the pay gap has closed some, over the last 50 or 60 years. But it's really gotten slow. So it hasn't really budged too much over the past 10 years. And if we keep going at this rate, this rate of change, the rate of change that we've seen over the last 10 years, it'll take more than 100 years to finally close the gap. I know.
Wow.
I know. So that's certainly not in my lifetime and, probably not in my own child's lifetime, but maybe in my grandchildren's lifetime, we would see that. I don't think there's any parent today who says, well, that's okay for my daughter.
Right.
I really just wanted to bring all of this to the fore for our listeners so that we feel not just angry about it, but that we feel so angry about it that we say to ourselves, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes anger can be a motivator to stand up and say something or do something. It doesn't mean you're going to act out in anger, but at the same time, it's more of, hey, I've got now motivation to try and make a change and raise this and talk more about it with other people. So yeah, I think it's all the statistics that you gave, some of them that I wasn't even aware of. It's very shocking and eye-opening. So thank you.
You're welcome. I'm happy to do it. So why don't we look at some good news now, right?
Okay.
Around women, because that was all pretty bad news, and I feel, bad about being the bearer of the bad news. So let's look at some good statistics about women. So we know that there's been some research around companies that have 3 or more women on their board of directors. And so they compared the performance of those companies to the performance of companies that didn't have any women on their board of directors, which sadly is still pretty common practice in today's corporate society. So let's look at what the statistics are when we do get women, at least 3 women on the board of directors. So we saw an 84% better return on sales.
Wow.
We saw a 60% better return on invested capital, and a 46% better return on equity. So we know then that when women are brought to the table and invited to be a part of the decision-making process, that tends to be a positive thing, that the diversity and the different points of view and perspective that women can bring really can be extremely positive for corporations and companies. That says to us, oh my gosh, then there's really no reason that women shouldn't be at the table. It's not going to hurt a company. And in fact, it's very likely that it's going to help the company. So I think, we can't just be outraged by the bad news and the statistics. We have to know the good news and be using that to advocate for change as well, right? So
yeah,
not
absolutely.
not just saying what we shouldn't do, but, trying to show what we should do and what would be, potential solution to the problem, at least one of them.
Oh, that's lovely. And I'm having a hard time kind of biting my tongue when you're saying some of these. I'm like, wow, really? Oh my gosh, this is great.
You should do that.
Yeah.
I love to hear that.
Yeah.
I know that people are probably thinking, well, this is really great, but like, what can I do? I'm raising a daughter. My daughter is young. What kinds of things can I as a parent or can we as a family do in order to potentially make life better for my daughter. And so I just wanted to chat about that for a few minutes. I think that, one of the most important things that we can do as families is educate our daughters about what's going on out there. I think that a lot of times talking about money and finance and how money works in our own families is kind of a taboo subject. So sometimes moms and dads don't even have like similar perspectives on how money should be spent or how money should be saved or how much should be spent versus how much should be saved. Sometimes one parent is a spender while the other parent is a saver, and that can create some tension. And so when there is tension, then oftentimes parents don't even want to talk about it because it's hard to talk about even between them, let alone talk about with their children or their daughters. And I think that we're making a big mistake by doing that. I think that we have to really open up with our kids about how money works and make it not a taboo subject. So if mom and dad don't agree on how money should be, managed, one thinks, oh, we should spend more, one thinks we should save more, maybe talk about that openly and discuss how, we don't always agree. So how can we find, ways to find the compromise place? How can we walk together rather than walking into one another, and working against one another? And you would know more about that than I would because,
Yeah, and I was going to say part of what I do is sometimes with my parents when money does come up during sessions and for girls, and they're thinking about how to help her out. Sometimes I'll just say, well, let's pause for a moment and let's explore those belief systems. What did you grow up with? How was money talked about in your family? Was it, it's money is a bad thing or is money a good thing versus, it's just an exchange of things. And so when they start to explore, when the parents explore what that belief is, that can sometimes help decrease the conflicts between them because then they have a better insight of, oh, now I know why you do what you do. And as you're saying, it's like when they have that open communication, they can start to come up with solutions on how to decrease the fighting and actually working together. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and one of the ways to do that is just to start encouraging parents, if they have, different beliefs, to take some time to walk in your partner's shoes, do some shopping and now if you're the saver, you be the spender and vice versa. And then, talk about what does that feel like and what might that be making your partner feel like? I think just getting people to really face that head on because it's not an impossible problem to solve by any means, but certainly it's going to be impossible to solve if everybody just keeps sweeping it under the rug and saying, well, we'll just kind of get through because I don't want to talk about this because this will just lead to a big argument,
Yeah.
So not the best choice.
Nope.
But sadly, the choice that many of us make, because life is stressful enough and, we don't want to sometimes be, it's hard to confront things that are difficult head on sometimes. So I just encourage us as families to do that and don't make talking about money taboo. So get it straight between you and your partner, your spouse, and then get it straight with your kids, So then teaching kids about budgeting
Mm-hmm.
and how to manage money. Really, what are the basics in personal finance? And most especially, how does credit work?
Yeah.
So kids, I think, do not understand how credit works. They do not understand remotely what it means to have 25 or 30% interest on a credit card, and then how long it will take even to pay off a small balance. Even $1,000 can
Mm-hmm.
take a really long time. So if you're out of college and you've racked up some credit card debt and you're having a hard time then paying off your student loans, you're going to have an even harder time paying off that credit card. And that interest just keeps compounding and compounding and compounding. And that really works against people. So I just think this is crucial. Kids need to come out of high school and college having a really good basic understanding of how to manage their own finances.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because, I mean, you've hit it when you said, that 25 to 30% interest rate. I was like, oh, it hits you right in the chest of going, oh my gosh, that's a huge interest on those.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And those small balances, it's like you've paid for that product or service or whatever it is you charged three times over by the
Yes.
time you've paid off that credit debt. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Making kids aware and leery of getting into too much debt.
Mm-hmm.
And that, is the same with even financial aid and, student loans. I mean, when we're talking about our girls, especially, so when they're coming out and, they're getting a job and doing equal work with a guy,
Mm-hmm.
same work as a guy, but they're making less money, it becomes even more difficult for them to pay off their student loans. And the research shows that women and girls have a much harder time paying off their student loans than men do.
Mm-hmm.
So the economic barriers compound, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you had to go into a lot of debt in order to get that education, hopefully that is going to get you a better job. But if you're going to be making less money than you should be making, it's going to be harder to pay off that debt.
Mm-hmm.
So where is the balancing act, and how do you make sure, how do girls, women, when they're ready to get a job, make sure that they actually do get a salary that is commensurate with the work that they are doing and commensurate with what men are being paid for the same kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they can do is there's a really great organization called the American Association of University Women, AAUW, I think it is. And they offer salary negotiation workshops.
Ooh, I love it. Because I was going to say, what I know is you have to negotiate that. But
You do. So you got to lean in, a little
Mhm.
bit, absolutely. But that's not easy for everybody to do. And not everybody's going to be able to do that after reading a book or just talking about it with their parents.
Mhm.
So I think negotiation is a really hard thing to do for almost anyone.
Mhm.
But I think that women especially struggle with it. And so, learning how to do that is really, really important. So
Yeah.
I encourage every listener out there who is trying to launch their daughter to go to the AAUW website. Just Google it and you'll find it, and look at the salary negotiation workshops and get a sense of what they're about and where they're offered, and when might be the right time for your daughter to be enrolled in one of those workshops so that she can be on a stronger footing when she's ready to negotiate pay and salary for her first or second or third job.
Oh, I love that. And I think as you're saying, it's so important, the workshops, the role playing that happens for teen kids, right? Whether it's a girl or a boy, but the role playing in teenage life is really important because they don't know what they don't know. And
Yep.
when they are able, and sometimes, there's still that anxiousness of trying to be like peers, but not having the skills because they're all on the same level. And then, wanting mom and dad to show them. And sometimes parents are like, I'm not sure how to do this because I've never
Hmm.
had to do it. So doing a workshop where they can role play that, it gives them that inner confidence. So when they go in there, yeah, there's still maybe some nervousness going on, but they really embody it more and they come across
Absolutely.
stronger during those interviews. So I
Yes.
love that. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I talked to one of my clients who had recently, this was actually a couple of years ago, but she had recently changed jobs. And she had just read the book Lean In.
Yeah.
And, we were sort of laughing about how she had just read it. And when she changed jobs, she said, they offered me something. And then I was just brave enough to actually push back and say, nope, you know what? This is what I would need in order to get, to come over to you. And they gave it to her. They
Awesome.
gave it to her.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that we as women are afraid to even ask,
Mm-hmm.
We're afraid to negotiate. We're afraid to even for a minute say, that's a really great offer, but this is what it would take. So I think empowering our girls to enter the workforce with that kind of strength would
Yeah.
just really, really go a long way to shrinking that pay gap
And I
and
agree with,
faster.
yeah, I totally agree with that, Amy. And I think the other part of that too is there's still a mindset that for girls and women that the salary equals your worth, and that's not true.
Right.
You are not defined by your salary. Your self-worth is not defined by that in any way, shape, or form. So being able to shift that mindset and saying no, whether it's truly based on budget, I have to have this type of salary in order to meet, my family needs, my business needs, whatever it is, knowing it's like, yep, this is what I need. And then that's where that negotiation piece comes from. But being able to separate the money is my self-worth. It's like, nope, two separate things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Gosh, if we could really, teach our girls that, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? I
Yeah.
think that would really start to shift the conversation and I think shift the culture out there in the
Yeah.
world.
Yep.
So, one final thing that I really would encourage families to do is to advocate on behalf of their daughters. Urge their elected officials to address these issues by, creating and enforcing better laws, by supporting, legislation that will go a long way towards shrinking that pay gap and, really making sure that women and girls are getting equal pay for equal work.
Yeah.
We don't need to stand by idly. So we as parents can work, within our own homes in order to do that, but we can also be doing things out in the world in order to do that. And if we're parenting boys, we should be educating them in the same way. We should be educating them that, women should not be paid less simply because they're women, and they should not be penalized simply because biologically they're the ones who have to go out and have babies.
Right.
Our boys are going to be future leaders in our economy as well. And so they're going to be decision makers just like our girls are going to be. So getting both our boys and our girls on the same page about what needs to happen as we move forward, I think is just crucial.
I totally agree. Yes. Awesome. Curious, Amy, you've given some really good references, whether it's the website for the AAUW and then also even the Lean In book. It's really good too. I'll put that on the show notes. I'm curious, are there any other books or websites that you may recommend to families to kind of go out and get a little more, I guess, I'm going to say empowerment regarding whether finances, budgeting, anything like that you would recommend?
Well, there are so many resources out there about, learning to manage your money and budget and do all of those things. I mean, there are lots of books, but one of the things that I would also really recommend to people, and I'm sorry if this sounds self-serving in any way, but get in touch with a financial advisor.
Yes. Nope. Yeah.
And there are some advisors out there who are willing to do coaching. I am an advisor who is willing to do that, which means, a lot of advisors just, are very they'll only do certain things with clients. Like some advisors will only do asset management. Some advisors really only want to do financial planning or retirement planning or college planning. And some advisors are willing to do coaching. And I am one of those people who is willing to do coaching, which means that we work with families and couples who are having, issues around money and help them work out those issues and actually put a budget in place and figure out how they're going to meet their financial goals. So it's great if you do a financial plan and you figure out, okay, well, this is what I'd need to save in order to retire, and this is what I would need to save in order to send my kids to college, to meet my goals in the future. But if you and your partner or spouse are not able to agree on immediately how resources need to be spent, it's going to be really, really tough to do the saving that needs to happen to meet those goals. So there's one thing about knowing what would need to happen. It's a whole different story about, okay, well, how do we make that work? because that needs to start happening now. And we don't know how to do that right now.
Right.
So really getting in touch with somebody who can help you put all the pieces together, I think is just vitally important. A lot of people will ask, well, how should we save for college? And the answer to that is, oh my gosh, it totally depends on what's going on in your own financial life. The way I would advise one family to save for college will be radically different from the advice that I would give another family, depending on all kinds of things like income and whether or not they have a 401k, whether or not they can put money into a Roth, are they maxing those things out, there are just so many variables that might change the advice. So again, I encourage people to get help,
Yeah.
and if a book isn't quite going to do it for you, then reach out to a real live person who can do it for you. It is so worth the investment, because you will really be much better off in the long run. And there is research that actually backs that up, that people who do work with financial advisors tend to do better at reaching their financial goals in the long run.
Yep.
So I heartily encourage that. There are lots of resources also on the AAUW website. I have to, point to them again, because they are such leaders in this fight, around economic security and equal pay for women. I really encourage listeners to go to that website, and it's just aauw.org, very easy. And, troll around on there, because there's just a lot of great stuff there. And many of the statistics that I quoted today come right from that website. So they're just a wonderful organization.
Well, beautiful. Thank you, Amy. Well, I also then, based on that, since you're saying you also do coaching, how can our listeners, if they would like to work with you, getting some coaching, how could they get a hold of you? What's your contact information or your website information so they could look at that?
So they can find me on our website, which is www.SamRIinvesting. That's 2 I's, SRIinvesting.com, or they can just email me directly at Amy, AMY, at SRIinvesting.com. And email is usually the best way to get in touch with me, because I'm often on the phone with people or out and about seeing clients. And so, but I've always got my email right with me, either right in front of me at my computer or on my phone. So feel free to email. Best way for me.
Excellent. And again, I will put that on the show notes. So if you are driving, please do not stop and try and write this down. It will be on the show notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Amy, this has just been a wealth of information, and I love your stance in it. Again, it's all about empowering young girls and women, and that's really kind of aligns with what I try and do with my therapy practice that I have, is raising awareness. And it's not just here in the U.S., it's literally globally, of trying to reach more and more to make it a global shift, and with the equality and empowerment. So thank you so much for being a guest on the show today, and all the wonderful information that you gave our listeners. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Nicole. It was really great to talk to you.
I invite you to subscribe on iTunes today. And if you have an Android, go ahead and go to Google Play or Stitcher or even iHeartRadio to subscribe and begin to download the weekly episodes. Thanks again for your support. Thank you for listening to Launching Your Daughter with Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. For more information or to stay up to date, go to launchingyourdaughter.com. You can sign up for my email list or join my Facebook group. Thank you.